History and lore. These are things that fill the world you develop, create, be it a fantasy world, a sci fi world, a thriller world, whatever it is. Ghosts, demons, and monsters. Every world we create has a history. However, there are many ways to develop that history, or more importantly, tell that history to your reader. Now, the way we're going to talk about today is allowing the reader to explore the history and lore of your world, but through the story. Remember, narratives are made of a plot and story. Plot is what needs to happen no matter what, and story is how it unfolds through the emotional experiences and choices of characters. So if the characters are exploring the plot and then they discover the history and lore, then the reader themselves learn about it. So it no longer becomes exposition, or it's not just like, hey, did you know back in 1301 there was a blah, 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 blah. You allow it to have an organic reveal, and maybe, just maybe, one of these examples or one of these things we talk about today will show you how you can take a historical truth and integrate it into the story and allow characters to move through it, and therefore show your history and lore through the emotional discovery of characters. So let's talk about it. Make stakes personal, well, global. So even if the antagonist or the threat, the stakes, are global, the world is going to die, or the kingdom's going to be attacked, or there's a huge army coming, whatever the case may be, right? Allow that narrative of that history of that world, because remember, sometimes you're writing the history in the present, right? Allow the story to be something a little bit more personal. Allow it to be about the character. Okay, for example, like let's say it's an epic story, and let's just use epic fantasy just for the show, right? So what is the personal stakes of a character that's dealing with global destruction or global potential, right? And that could be just as simple as somebody trying to save their loved one because a volcano is going to explode, and they're dealing. It's Pompeii, right? So they're like, the volcano is going to explode. We're going to get out of here. So yes, the volcano is happening, and it's going to explode in Pompeii. But it's really about this love story that develops, and ultimately, I want to save you. I want to save you. So by allowing the stakes to be personal, it gives the reader a chance to explore that historical moment playing out through the character's story, and that's a little bit more evocative, one might say. All right, but smaller, more intimate stories can also add a lot of depth to these grandiose explorations of history and law. And this could be simple as, like, let's say you have a history in your world, and again, let's just use epic fantasy, just to simplify it. All right, there's a legend that 500 years ago, the great blah 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 conquered the Dark Lord, right? Okay, but it turns out the main protagonist in your narrative is a descendant of the great blah blah blah, or they are the great descendant of the Dark Lord. So you could go either way, right? But now you get to explore what they're dealing with emotionally, on a personal level. It's intimate, and how they are working through that, and the connection they have to that, only to realize that it's now their time to stand up. So do they stand up as the hero or the villain, right? And here's something else. Let's say they are related to the Dark Lord, and it's their job to stand up and take the place of the Dark Lord after 500 years. What if they and the descendant of the hero switch places? Okay, that story is intimate. Okay, but it is exploring the history. So now through them, you get to learn about the Dark Lord, you get to learn about the hero, you get to learn about that war 500 years ago, you get to learn about how over the centuries, these generational connections interrupted, or interlude with the history that led to the present. So that's a fun way to really play with it. Now, big events open little details. So again, let's say you wanted to tell a historical a fiction story or a historical retelling of a story, and you choose World War II. World War II is massive. Okay, it spans many years, many locations, different people, different cultures, different ideologies, you name it. So if World War II was something that changed our world, there's so many different things you could do. You could do before the war, during the war, at any period, after the war, directly after the war, sometime after the war. Maybe um, there is a character in your narrative, and they want to join the war because they're going to actually go fight, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's like 2000, or maybe 1988, and they're going to join the army, but they're talking to their grandfather, and maybe the father or mother is like, or both the parents are just like, hey, listen, we don't want you to join the army. And they're like, but I want to. And they're like, go talk to your grandfather. And then they learn that the grandfather was somebody in World War II. And then they tell their story, and one thing leads to another. And we learn the history of World War II through this particular character's past story. Or you could just do that story. But the point is, you could take big events, big historical moments that had happened, are happening, or potentially could happen, and allow it to be told through the little details of characters, right? Um, you could even allow your narrative to be the catalyst that creates the thing that's destructive. You know what I'm saying? Instead of exploring like the destructive thing, you could lead up to it, right? Or it could be people living because of it. And it's these little moments, right? That through these big events that really allow for you to dive deep into the history and law of it. All right, let's talk about interwoven story arcs. Another really a great way to explore your history and law and to build on your world is allowing multiple POVs. All right, and a nice thing to do is, for argument's sake, let's say it's like a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing, but it's not necessarily a romance. But we explore the Montagues. Whenever two households, both alike in dignity and favor, on the way we lay our scene. Right? The Capulets, the Montagues. Right? So you have those two stories, but instead of like the romance, you could just have the families. What is this family doing? What is that family doing? And how are they interacting? Maybe not directly, but indirectly. And then by exploring that, we now get to see more of those families. So that's a take on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, but as an example. But you could look at your own narratives the same way. You could take families and say, well, what are these families doing during this time? And how do they connect to the greater picture? How do they connect to the history of things? What is the law of it? You can play within the time of the history too. Like if you have something that's very important to you and you're like, I love this historical element of my world, maybe just explore that. But to get the most out of it, create more than one POV. All right. And allow those arcs to intertwine. All right. The physical world plays a huge part in exploring your history and lore. Landscapes, rivers, cities, runes, mountains, the names that are given to these things, the design and structures, bridges, cities that have risen and fallen, cultures, everything about the physical world is a part of that history. All right. And again, a lot of the stuff I'm telling you, you don't have to do a lot of deep dive into it before you write. You can just have like general ideas. You'd be like, oh, it'd be interesting. And this bridge was 1,000 years old, but now that bridge has history. That bridge has something to it. It has a story. Who crossed it? Have you ever in real life stood somewhere, especially old, and like let's say you went on vacation to like Europe, or even if you're from the United States, and you were in Pennsylvania, or you went to the Liberty Bell, like you're standing near a history, and like the idea of saying, oh, I wonder, wow, there were people in this room, like you go to Paul Revere's house, you know what I'm saying? Uh, so the physical world holds with it something greater than the present of what you see. And you could allow that to influence the story. You could allow that to influence how things are interacting with it, etc., etc. The physical world can allow you to breathe your history and lore through it, through the names, and you don't even have to go deeply into it. Just the name of something, you know. All right, all right. Now that brings us to a sense of history and legacy. Okay, life is ever growing and evolving, especially the world around us, uh, and it is completely rooted in history. Even me, I'm 46 at the time of telling this. However, yeah, because this is all pre-recorded. I'll be 47 when this comes out. Um, I have gone back to my old towns and cities, and I've literally seen or been in my old homes that were now owned by other people. And looking at areas growing up and watching it change, that's something that I take with me and I allow those feelings to be put into my books, in my stories and my screenplays, because I love the idea of the world growing around us, or and sometimes falling around us, you know. And uh, you want your characters to understand that too. All right. So the sense of history and legacy is not just these grand stories of prophecy, but they can be as simple as, especially in a romance or just even a modern thriller, they could be a sense of when and where, like this town 10 or 15 or even 20 years ago, or, I haven't been back to this town in 30 years. And then they go there and things have changed, but things are the same, like there are bridges, there are houses that still exist, there are parks, there are whatever. And your your characters can be a part of rediscovering that. But you can also allow them in the present to influence the future history, meaning like they could be a part of the fall and rise of empires. They could be, a part of seeing a town come together. They could be maybe the fourth or fifth generation of a small town that becomes a city. Um, Characters, uh, they are more than just somebody that's in your narrative. They can directly influence or be affected by the history you're making, the history that has come before them, and the potential history that will be there, right? But the present is also very important. Um, because you never know how things will turn out for a character when they find out that their great 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 grandfather was indeed a warlord, or that their brother was a war hero. What about something simpler, like I was mentioning, I like the Benjamin Franklin Gates in National Treasure. I like Ben Gates. Ben Gates, his name is Benjamin Franklin Gates. National Treasure. So his first the first movie takes us down into the deeper unknown of history, and it unfolds through what he knows. Now obviously some is loosely based on research, and then some is obviously made up, but the second movie is like more closely attached to his Gates name, and so it's really nice to see a narrative unfold through a character and how they are influenced by the history and influence history in itself, or they bring light to history. So that's something to think about. All right. Okay. All right. Now, this last one, creating a lasting consequence and impact. To allow your history and law to develop or be explored. All right. What is the lasting consequences and an impact of the past history that is influencing the present, right? That's part of your job, as allowing the history and lore to breathe through your narrative. But more importantly, what is going to be the lasting consequences and impact of the present actions that your characters are taking to influence the future, right? But allow your world to be a living entity that's always evolving, either because of action taken or the world around it. you know, your characters themselves can set in motion certain things that have major consequences. Um, again, if we're talking about like epic fantasy, a major war could leave kingdoms in ruin. They could change the political landscape. Leaders are changing. The destruction of magical artifacts, whatever, the altering of balance of power. Um, or it could be as simple as somebody has passed away, or simple as somebody falls in love, or simple as somebody has a child, right? These lasting impacts are important to exploring the history of your world, either from before or currently into. So when you're writing, you want to allow your history to be less exposition and become part. I mean, you can expose do exposition for like quick things, like if you just want to say, oh, this house was built in 1903, like that's fine because it's through character exposition. The character is unfolding that information, right? But when you're writing your narrative, you could say, well, how do I expand my world through its history and law by allowing it to be a part of the narrative in one way or another. But again, you know I don't know if you know this, but a story could be as simple as robbing banks. You know what I'm saying? The character might, I don't know, live in the forest, with merry men, and his name could be Robin, and he could be messing with the sheriff, and he could cause a rebellion, and then they tell stories about him. You know what I'm saying? Like how does your stories end? Like, do they have a deep, impactful, to the part where they call law and legends? You know what I'm saying? So think about that. All right, final thoughts. Letting the elements of your world influence your narrative is a great way to build on your world development, and it creates a lived in environment and setting, and allowing your history and lore to be filtered through the narrative itself and the characters' emotional experiences and choices. All this is a great way to help build stakes, both personally, globally, or developing characters in general. All right. Storylines are not just about big events or characters winning a race or two people getting married. They're about the characters, the world they live in, and the legacy they leave behind. A narrative is more than I need A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because that's only plot. Plot is what needs to happen. A true narrative, a full narrative, also incorporates the story and how characters are affected by that emotionally through their choices and the experiences, but more importantly, how they influence the world around them and the characters around them and what they leave. Um, so, when you're thinking about this, obviously you're allowed to think outside the box. You're allowed to challenge yourself. You're allowed to try crazy things. There's nothing wrong. It's all fake. It's all made up. Do whatever you want. But it will help lead to your voice as a writer. The more you discover what works for you and what you enjoy doing and what you're trying to say. But most importantly, all I'm just saying, like, every world is made up, and that means you have the freedom to change things, adapt the story, and make it completely yours. So have fun with it, embrace the creative journey, and know that each draft brings you closer to realizing your true vision. As for me, I can't wait to read your book and hear about bloop bloop blahs, and that these bloop bloop blahs are basically dogs with cat personalities. They're meowsers. It's a meowsing, write meow whenever you can write that. So I mean, it's all made up. It's all fake. You could literally make blue blue blahs which look like dogs, but they have cat personalities, and that would be scary. Anyway, next video. Oh, world building exercises and prompts. That was an exciting video script, right? All right. Question. What do you allow history that has come before, or how present actions will influence the history of your world in the future? Do you do that? Is that something you enjoy doing? If not, what has kept you from that? Let me know in the comments below, etc., etc. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. And of course, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Bye.